Hi, welcome to History of the Modern World, Week 2. This week we are looking at the political revolutions of the mid 18th and early 19th century, and then move on until about the mid 1800s. So this week, really, we're looking at the Enlightenment's manifestation into specific political revolutions in the Atlantic world. And the Atlantic world basically incorporates Europe and the Americas. So what we're working on today are intellectual and political global connections. So this is furthering this idea of viewing the nation state as a new form of political organization rather than just a region owned by a lord, a king, etc. And what we're also going to be merging into is this acceptance of the Western way as the only way, at least specifically as identified by the West themselves, the Americans and the Europeans. So when they come into increased contact with other political structures, this is very much going to be connecting later to imperialism, as they might recognize a king or a lord or some sort of tribal organization, and yet they're going to view this as very, very primitive. That their way, their own sophisticated political system, that is the best way to go about things. So the first thing we need to do is explain the link to the Enlightenment. And this is going to bring up social contract theory and popular sovereignty. So these are things we looked at a little bit on the chapter in Europe, specifically with the rise of Louis XIV and also the English Civil War and the English Glorious Revolution. Now, social contract theory comes into direct conflict with the divine right theory espoused by kings and the absolute monarchs. Instead, what a select number of philosophers argue is that mankind is entering into a contract in terms of how they're going to live in society, and they deem this civil society. Philosophers deem the opposite of civil society as the wilderness, the wild, when man just looks out for his individual self rather than the collective whole. So one has to sacrifice a number of their political freedoms in order for security. And yet, so that's the basic definition that the philosophers agree on. But they tend to disagree on the specific manner of governorship or exactly what rights are really given up. The philosopher that is brought up in conjunction with the revolutions of the 18th and 19th century is John Locke, himself very much influenced by England's Glorious Revolution and the signing of the English Bill of Rights. John Locke's discussions on the two treatises of government, he very much defends his own particular idea of popular sovereignty or of the rule of the people. And Locke claims that because government was a contract, both the government and society themselves have to hold up the terms of the contract by governing justly, by protecting private property, and by ensuring certain civil liberties. And this is all going back to the main argument for why James II was forced to flee England and why Mary and William were brought in. So it's basically justifying that entire action that happened. Now, if the government fails to uphold their end of the contract, again, getting into the Glorious Revolution, then people not only have the right, but they have the responsibility to construct a new government. Now, other philosophers such as Baron de Brade and de Montesquieu, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, they're also contributing to social contract theory by suggesting representative governments, checks and balances between branches of government to prevent corruption, and also direct participation in government. Now, John Locke, for example, would not really be stressing this idea of direct participation. He's definitely going to be more of the idea of the parliamentary rule where people elect representatives, and again, only a certain amount of people are electing those representatives, generally white landowning males. because they're considered to have more of a stake in society because they have private property. So the idea of everyone participating equally in government is considered to be actually fairly radical for the time. Now, these political ideas are circulating throughout Europe. Some monarchs are going to ban publication or even possession of these works altogether, out of fear of what it could do to their own personal rule. And we tend to find this more in Catholic countries, such as Spain, Portugal, France, the Holy Roman Empire, the Austrian Empire, etc., because Catholicism very much was tied to that idea of divine right. The Protestants tried to use it a little bit, but for the most part, it wasn't going to work out terribly well. Elizabeth I was really the only one who was able to really grab hold of that idea of the monarch and the church being one, or being the defender of the faith. Subsequent monarchs are basically going to uphold their relationship with the church, and yet these Protestant nations are better known for their representative governments. Now, others are going to allow publication, like Great Britain, like the Netherlands, and this is going to enable the ideas to travel to the Americas. Now, Europe has spent most of the 17th and 18th centuries in a constant state of war over boundaries, land, prestige, wealth, relationships, trade, religion, and control of thrones. Now, these wars are spilling into other locations around the world. This is referred to as theaters of war. Now, this could be trading posts in Africa and Asia, so you might have naval battles there, the major sea lanes around the world where most of the travel is. It's also going to occur in the American and Pacific colonies. Now, the one that has the most relevance to our focus this week is going to be the 7 Years' War, or as the British colonists in America refer to it as the French and Indian War. So the 7 Years' War is basically another war over control of the throne. In America, it's going to be fought along the western boundaries of the American 13 colonies and within French Canada. So you have the British regulars, the British soldiers, and their Indian allies on one side, and then you have the French and their Indian allies on the other side. The colonies are serving as a base of operations for the British, and the colonial militias are guiding the British Army through the wilderness. And this is where George Washington gains a lot of his military reputation among the colonists. Now, the militias are generally snubbed by the lobsterbacks or the regular British Army because they're considered to be ill-trained, scraggly, and rabble, compared to how disciplined the regular army is supposed to be. But the militia, the colonists, are on the frontier, and they know how to fight in the wilderness against an unseen enemy, rather than the very specific lines and blocks of soldiers that the European soldiers are used to in the middle of fields. These very tight regulations. Now, the end of the war is going to result in Britain gaining control of Canada from France, and also a great deal of relief from American colonists who really want an end to the constant raids.